Have you been resisting what's really important to you? Have you been procrastinating from getting things done? Hi, I'm Debra Kasowski, and today I am talking to you about how the resistance is real. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Today I'm going to talk to you about resistance. Resistance is real. It shows up in so many forms. But the real truth of the matter is that we are creatures of habit. And we have a tendency of resisting change, and change is progression. And those changes can show up in many different forms, often our habits. And the resistance occurs in forms of, no, I don't want to go on a diet. No, I don't want to exercise. No, I don't want to follow this regime or take an extra course or read this book. There's forms of resistance, and often it's things that are good for us that we are resisting because it is a change of who we have to be. Resistance shows up in not following through on things or taking initiative. But the most of the time when you see resistance, it's often in the forms of procrastination, putting off work until the deadline comes, and also rationalization, giving all the reasons why you're not following through on something, and fear. You know, I don't know about you, but sometimes I get butterflies when I go up on stage and to speak to a group. And what that means and what that tells me is that you're invested in something that's really important to you. And as you are invested in things, you want to make sure that everything turns out just right. So that is why resistance tends to show up in the form of fear. Another form of resistance that you'll see people criticizing others. And when you see that happening, it's often because they are not willing to do the work themselves, so it's easier to criticize someone else. And if you've ever noticed, the people who are on the fast lane, doing their work, getting successes, reaping some rewards, they aren't criticizing anyone because they're busy, focused on where they're going, what they're doing, and making the magic happen. So when you think about resistance, here's one thing I want you to know. Everyone has resistance at one type, form, or time or another. There's different things that we resist. As a rule of thumb, Stephen Pressfield in his book, The War of Art, says, the more scared you are to do the work of work or the calling, the chances are that's exactly what you need to be doing. So if you think of something that you have maybe self-sabotaged, have a lot of self-doubt around, or you've been procrastinating and holding things back, chances are it might be something that you need to be doing. See, our emotions are messengers, and they're there to tell us whether we need new due diligence. Our brain wants to protect us. So that's what's happening. So I'm going to give you some tips as to how to conquer resistance. And in Stephen Pressfield's book, one of the biggest ones is taking your mindset of how you perceive yourself and how your perception of how you see yourself really impacts the actions that you take. And one of the things he creates this differentiation that if you're an amateur, you behave this way. If you're a professional, you behave a certain way. Now, I'm going to call on you to be the professional because that's how they overcome resistance. A professional will show up every day. Regardless of how they're feeling, they're going to put in the work. They set priorities. What is most important? What's urgent that needs to get done? Brian Tracy has a book called Eat That Frog, and that's usually that big project, the thing that you've been putting aside, that's daunting to you, overwhelming. But when you attack it and eat that frog first, everything else naturally flows from it because it's this big thing in your mind, because that's often where resistance comes from. We often think resistance is out here in the form of people, bosses, spouses, kids, and the economy, the weather. But the resistance is right here in our minds. And when you can overcome that resistance, you can take leaps and bounds in your industry or whatever you're working on in your life. It's because it starts with awareness. Being able to name where that awareness comes from. Showing up and being your best. Also, setting those priorities, working on those hard things, because you can do hard things. The other thing that you can do is dedicate yourself to mastery. Dedicate yourself to doing things well. Don't take failure or rejection personally. There is a road and a path for everything. Sometimes it's the wrong time, wrong resources, wrong people, wrong situation. And it doesn't mean no forever. And it might be that it needs to be targeted to someone else, someone who's open and willing to hear. And it often leads to things bigger than that. And there's often lessons to be learned. So if you're going to conquer resistance, show up as your best today. And focus in on what you need to do for you. Keep in your lane. And as you do that and do the work, sit down at the table, lean in at the meeting, share your voice, let the magic happen when you push past resistance and really show up to be that professional of that person who's dedicated to their craft, wanting to improve the world one day at a time. Thank you for joining me on this video. I'd love for you to pop over to my website at www.debrakasowski.com, where you can learn more about coaching with me, having me speak, or interviewing me for your podcast. Have a great day.